I never thought a single scream could rip through calm and shatter my world. The market square erupted in fury, vendors and townsfolk united in rage. Before I knew it, stones flew, and a frail old man lay crumpled beneath the onslaught. Dawn had broken gently over Elderwood Market, its soft rose and gold light sliding across uneven rooftops, dripping into crooked alleyways, and painting the cobbles in a fleeting glow of peace. I stood at my little stall, my breath clouding in the morning chill, arranging loaves of rosemary bread and a small pile of tomatoes. It was modest, nothing compared to the grand spice tents or the colorful cloth merchants, but it was my livelihood. Every loaf I sold meant another day of shelter, another night of warmth beneath my leaking roof. I adjusted the cracked lantern that dangled above my table, forcing my weary shoulders back. My rent was due, and the weight of that burden pressed heavier than any sack of flour. I told myself to focus, knead the dough, sell the bread, count the coins, survive. But fate has a way of tearing through the ordinary when you least expect it. The sound came first. A scream, sharp and raw, slicing the market's hum like a butcher's knife through bone. My heart jolted. Every vendor's chant, every haggle, every clatter of wares froze. Even the chickens stilled in their coops, feathers bristling as though they too sensed the danger swelling in the air. When I turned, the square had already transformed. Merchants abandoned their scales, customers raised fists, and from all directions a mob converged on the fountain at the market's center. There, crumpled like discarded rags, lay a beggar, frail, silent, his eyes wide with terror. I knew him. Everyone did. They called him Old Rowan, though his true name was forgotten. He was a shadow that drifted among us, muttering little, surviving on scraps and mercy. I had given him bread more times than I could count, thinking nothing of it beyond a passing kindness. But compassion fades quickly when fear and hatred take hold. "Thief!" someone shouted. "Cursed wretch!" cried another. Stones, torn from stalls and alley gutters, filled their fists. The first struck him squarely in the ribs, and he crumpled with a groan, arms barely strong enough to shield his head. I froze. For a moment, my body screamed at me to stay hidden behind my stall, to let the fury burn itself out. But another memory slammed into me, my mother's fevered cough echoing through a dim hospital corridor, her frail hand reaching out while I stood powerless to ease her pain. That helplessness had carved a scar in me I swore never to feel again. Before thought could catch up, I was running. I shoved past gawking vendors, abandoning bread and tomatoes to the chaos. My lungs burned with every stride, but still I pushed forward until I reached the fountain's edge. A fruit crate lay overturned nearby. I seized it, flipping it upright and kneeling behind it as stones began to rain. The wood splintered beneath the barrage, bruising my arms and shoulders as I braced it like a shield. A jagged edge grazed my wrist, drawing blood, but I gritted my teeth and held firm. The crowd roared louder. Protecting him? Then she's one of them. A butcher, apron stained with blood, stepped forward brandishing a cleaver that gleamed like lightning in the dawn. My chest tightened. If I stayed, I would be the next target. If I moved, Rowan would die. I made my choice. With trembling arms, I heaved Rowan onto my back. He was so light, more bone than flesh, yet his frailty nearly toppled me. My shawl clung wet to my shoulders as the butcher lunged, hurling a plank that splintered inches from my head. Somehow, staggering under his weight, I broke free from the square, sprinting toward the narrow alleyways beyond. The mob's fury surged after us, curses crashing like waves. Stalls toppled in our wake, sacks of grain spilling white rivers across the cobbles, barrels of fish bursting open in briny floods. My feet slipped on crushed tomatoes and shattered pottery, but Rowan's thin arms gripped my neck, urging me forward with what little strength he had left. At last, we burst into a shadowed alley, the market's noise muffled behind stone walls. My knees buckled, and I lowered Rowan to the ground. His breath rattled, shallow and uneven, blood streaking his wrist. I tore strips from my shawl, binding his wounds with trembling hands. His storm-gray eyes flickered open. "Why?" he rasped, voice like torn parchment. "No one deserves stones for their misery," I whispered, knotting the fabric tighter. "Not while I can stand in their way." For a moment, the rain began to fall, soft and cold, washing the blood into the cracks between stones. I thought we had a moment of safety. But then a shadow filled the alley's mouth. The butcher's figure loomed, cleaver raised, his voice dripping with cruel amusement. "Thought you could hide, stall girl? This ends now." My pulse hammered, my body trembling between fear and resolve. I crouched over Rowan, clutching the crate's splintered board as my only shield. As I crouch over him, the butcher's cleaver glints in the sunlight, aimed at us. My heart hammers as I realize I've made myself the next target. The alley narrows, rain turning the stones to slick mirrors of dread. Can one act of bravery stand against a tide of vengeance? Tomorrow, I must face the market's wrath, or watch everything I've fought for crumble. My pulse pounded louder than the mob's shouts as I hoisted him to my back. Every splintered plank and overturned stall blurred into a tunnel of dread. One misstep could mean both our deaths in the market's underbelly. The butcher's cleaver came down with a hiss of steel, and instinct alone saved us. I shoved the fruit crate up as a shield, the blade biting deep into its wood with a shuddering crack. The impact numbed my arm, but the moment's reprieve gave me the strength I needed. With Rowan clinging weakly to my shoulders, I pushed forward, plunging deeper into the narrow alley where only shadows dwelled. Behind us, the mob howled. Curses and promises of vengeance echoed, bouncing off the stone walls like the growl of a beast too large to cage. The rain had come in earnest now, fat drops pelting down and running in silver rivulets along the cobblestones, turning every step into a treacherous gamble. My skirts snagged on broken crates and splintered beams, but I dared not slow. Rowan's weight was almost nothing, yet every jolt of his frail body against mine reminded me of the fragile life depending on my strength. His breathing rattled in my ear, uneven and shallow. At any moment I feared he would slip away. My shoulder ached from where the cleaver had grazed me, warm blood mingling with the rain. But pain was a distant echo beneath the roaring need to survive. The alley twisted like a serpent, narrow enough that two men could not walk side by side. I pressed Rowan closer, slipping along damp walls slick with moss, the bricks cold against my palm. My lungs burned, each inhale heavy with the stench of rot and spilled wine from a toppled barrel. Still I ran. The mob reached the alley's mouth, their torches blazing, voices merging into one furious chant. "Drag them out!" The butcher's voice cut above the rest, deep, mocking, relentless. "No hole is deep enough to hide you, girl." My chest tightened. Fear clawed at my insides, whispering that there was no escape. Yet beneath the fear pulsed something fiercer. Resolve. My mother's words returned to me, spoken on nights when hunger gnawed at us both. Mercy is the only coin worth spending. I would not let this life, this fragile man's dignity, be trampled into dust. A sudden groan of wood split the air. Ahead, a vendor's stall collapsed into the alley, crates of salted fish spilling across our path. The stench was sharp, cloying, but I had no time to flinch. I leapt, dragging Rowan's weight with me, feet splashing into brine and scales that glittered in the torchlight. Behind us, curses rang louder. The mob slowed, but not stopped. The alley bent sharply left, spitting us out into a cramped courtyard. Here, shadows deepened, broken only by a single lantern flickering in a crooked window overhead. The ground was littered with debris, splintered boards, rusted tools, the carcass of a cart long abandoned. I stumbled to a halt beneath the archway, my breath ragged, heart pounding as though it might burst. Rowan's whisper brushed my ear. "Leave me." His voice was cracked, faint, like parchment crumbling to dust. Save yourself. I dropped to my knees, lowering him against the damp wall. Never. My voice trembled, but my conviction held. You will not die in the gutter, like discarded cloth. Not while I can stand. His hand, cold and trembling, touched my cheek. In his storm-gray eyes I saw both despair and something deeper, trust. It pierced me sharper than any blade. I ripped a fresh strip from my shawl, binding his bleeding arm tighter, my fingers slick with blood and rain. Thunder rolled above, shaking the very stones. The storm raged as though the heavens themselves had joined in the market's fury. I scanned the courtyard. A door, my door, stood at the far end, its wood swollen from rain, but familiar. Safe. Beyond it lay my workshop, my sanctuary. If we could just reach it, perhaps for a few hours at least we could rest. But movement at the alley's mouth froze me. Torchlight flickered, shadows lengthening across the courtyard's stones. The butcher stepped through, cleaver dripping rainwater, his bulk filling the space like a nightmare made flesh. His grin was jagged, cruel. Cornered, he sneered. Both of you. My breath hitched. I rose slowly, shielding Rowan with my body, clutching a splintered board as though it were a sword. The storm hammered down, wind whipping my hair into my eyes. My entire body screamed at me to flee, but there was nowhere left to run. The butcher advanced, boots sloshing in puddles. "Mercy makes fools," he spat, "and fools die." I tightened my grip on the board. My arms shook, not from weakness, but from the sheer force of resolve gathering within me. I thought of my mother, of the children I had fed scraps to, of every kindness I had ever seen wither under cruelty's heel. Not this time. Rowan stirred behind me, his voice faint but certain. "She will not break." The butcher's cleaver gleamed as he raised it high, rain cascading off its edge in silver streaks. My heart hammered against my ribs. I crouched lower, every muscle taut, the storm screaming above us as though urging me to stand. And then, the cleaver arcs downward, gleaming like a bolt of lightning. I grip the broken board, bracing for impact that could end us both. Rowan's ragged breath hitches, his fate bound to mine in this heartbeat. The storm's roar drowns all else, a drumbeat of destiny. In this breathless instant, mercy and death collide. Dawn's first light revealed shattered stalls and scattered goods. The market's gossip seized upon our flight, miracle or madness. In my dusty workshop, I bandaged his wounds, heart still throbbing. The storm passed with the night, leaving Elderwood Market bruised and broken. When the sun finally pierced the clouds, its pale rays glinted on overturned carts and scattered wares, apples rolling into gutters, spilled spices staining the cobbles in streaks of crimson and gold. It was as though the square itself bore witness to the madness that had swept through it. I had carried Rowan through the chaos, my limbs trembling with exhaustion, until the safety of my workshop door closed behind us. Now, in the muted hush of morning, I knelt beside his cot. The place smelled of sawdust, old oil, and damp wool. My tools, chisels, planes, half-finished carvings, lay forgotten on the bench. The only task that mattered now was the frail man before me. Rowan's breathing was shallow, his chest rising in uneven rhythm. The cloth I had bound over his arm was soaked through, crimson blooming across its weave. I tore more strips from what remained of my shawl, binding tighter, whispering prayers under my breath, though I had little faith they would be heard. The storm outside had ended, but within my walls the tempest still raged. At last, his eyes flickered open, storm-gray, tired, but sharp with awareness. "Why?" His voice rasped like dry parchment. "Why risk yourself? For me?" I paused, pressing fresh salve into his wound. My throat tightened, memories clawing to the surface. I saw my mother again, her hand trembling with fever, her eyes pleading for mercy that never came. No healer had answered. No neighbor had stepped forward. She had died while the world turned indifferent. I swallowed hard. Because no one deserves stones for their misery, I whispered. And I will not let another life be ground into dust while I stand by. Rowan's lips trembled, as though he wished to speak further, but his strength faltered. He sank back into the pillow, eyes closing in fragile surrender. I brushed damp hair from his brow and covered him with a blanket, the same one I had once wrapped around myself on nights when the cold seeped through my walls. Outside, the market was already alive with whispers. Through the thin cracks in my shutters, I heard them, vendors recounting what they had seen. She shielded him with nothing but a crate, one marveled. Madness, another muttered. No one defies a mob and lives. Or perhaps, a softer voice answered, a miracle. Each word drifted into my workshop like smoke, choking me with equal parts fear and hope. To some, I was a savior, to others a fool. Either way, my life had changed irrevocably. Rowan stirred again, and this time, with trembling fingers, he reached inside his tattered cloak. From within he withdrew a folded parchment, sealed with wax bearing a crest I did not recognize. 2 interlocked hands beneath a rising sun. His hand shook as he held it out to me. This, he murmured, is all that remains of my family's legacy. Keep it safe. Open it when you are ready. I hesitated, heart hammering. The parchment was thick, fine, far beyond anything a beggar should possess. Its weight alone felt unnatural in my palm, as though it carried not just ink and words, but centuries of power. My thumb brushed the seal. Not yet. I could not open it, not while the echoes of last night's fury still rang in my ears. Instead, I tucked it into the drawer of my workbench, hidden beneath chisels and scraps of wood. Whatever secrets it held could wait until Rowan's wounds were healed. The hours crawled on, the workshop heavy with silence, broken only by the creak of rafters and Rowan's labored breathing. I busied myself with small tasks, boiling water, steeping herbs, cleaning wounds. My hands shook with fatigue, but I forced them steady. Each act of care was both a shield and a vow. I had saved him once. I would not let him slip away now. By midday, a knock rattled the door. My pulse spiked. I glanced at Rowan, his eyes wide with alarm, though his body too weak to move. With a deep breath, I unlatched the door. A boy stood there, a market runner no older than 12, clutching a scroll sealed with the crest of the council. His eyes darted nervously from me to the cot behind me, as though he already knew too much. "Summons for you, mistress," he stammered, thrusting the scroll into my hand before darting away. I closed the door and broke the seal. The parchment bore few words, but each landed like a hammer blow. By order of the Elderwood Market Council, you are to appear at first light, tomorrow, to account for your actions. Failure to attend will be taken as guilt. My knees weakened. Already the council had heard. Already judgment loomed. I looked to Rowan. He met my gaze with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "They will not believe you acted in mercy," he said. "They will brand you reckless." Or worse, I clenched the parchment, my nails biting into its edge. "Then I will not go alone," I whispered. "If they demand answers, they shall have them. The truth will not remain buried." Rowan studied me, his expression unreadable, then nodded once. "Then you are braver than I ever was." That night, as rain tapped against the shutters and shadows crawled across the walls, I sat at my workbench, the sealed parchment calling to me from its drawer. My fingers hovered over it, torn between dread and curiosity. Finally, I drew it out. The wax seal cracked under my thumb with a soft pop. The parchment unfurled, gilded letters catching the lamplight. My name leapt from the page. My breath stopped. The deed to stall 12. The market's heart. Rights of stewardship, of authority over grain reserves and council disputes. My name etched in ink as its guardian. I staggered, the parchment trembling in my hands. This was no accident. Rowan's gift was more than gratitude. It was power, a mantle I had never sought. and tomorrow, before the council, I would be forced to wield it. Rowan's weak voice breaks the silence. The council will not welcome you. They will test you. The deed trembles in my grip, my name glowing in gilded script. Outside, the market bells toll, summoning dawn's reckoning. I whisper to the shadows. Mercy brought me here. But will it be enough? Tomorrow, compassion itself must stand trial. The parchment felt heavier than any chest of gold. Each embossed letter flickered like fire under candlelight. Could this be a gift of mercy, or a trap laid in silence? The night after the council's summons, I sat alone in my workshop, the deed spread across the work table. A single lantern flickered overhead, its flame fighting against shadows that clung to the rafters. Outside, the storm had passed, but its memory still lingered in every drip of rain through the cracked shingles. The parchment before me seemed to radiate its own gravity, demanding my full attention, my trembling devotion. I ran my fingers across its edge. The vellum was not like ordinary trade papers. It was thick, its surface smoothed with oils, gilded at the borders. The crest stamped across the wax still burned in my mind. Two interlocked hands beneath a rising sun. The very same emblem Rowan had pressed into my hands with trembling certainty. I read the opening lines aloud, the words filling the room with unearthly weight. By the authority of the Elderwood Market Council and by covenant of the Rowan line, stewardship of Stall 12 is conferred upon Rosemary Gale, guardian of mercy. My name shimmered in gold script, sharp and undeniable. My throat tightened. Stall 12, the jewel of Elderwood Market, the stall by the fountain where merchants fought and schemed for even a single day's rights. And now it was mine, signed and sealed. But there was more. Beneath the bold proclamation lay rows of finely inked clauses, each demanding careful reading. I leaned closer, lantern light warming the letters. The first clause granted me power to relieve debts and fees for those unable to pay. Another entrusted me with authority over the emergency grain stores hidden beneath the market's vaults. Another still gave me the right to mediate council disputes, my word binding if the council was divided. At the very bottom, one line was written in scarlet ink. Mercy alone sustains stewardship. Should the steward forsake compassion, all seals shall break, and exile shall follow. My pulse stumbled. This was no ordinary inheritance. It was not wealth to be hoarded or privilege to be enjoyed. It was a vow, sealed in blood and consequence. Behind me, Rowan stirred. He had risen from the cot, his frame still frail but his eyes sharp with fire. He leaned on the wall, cloak draped around his shoulders. You see it now, he said quietly. I turned, parchment trembling in my grip. Why me? Why grant such power to a baker's daughter with nothing but debts and bread crusts? He stepped forward, his shadow long in the lantern glow. Because power built on greed will always collapse. My family proved that. For generations, the Rowan line controlled Elderwood's markets, through coin, through fear, through calculated cruelty. I tried to change it. I begged them to show mercy. For that, they cast me out, stripped my name, left me to starve. His voice cracked, but he did not falter. I wandered as a beggar not because I had to, but because I needed to understand what it meant to be powerless, to feel the stones of hatred, to survive on the crumbs of kindness. That is where I found you, and that is why this deed bears your name. I stared at him, words caught in my throat. I remembered his hollow eyes as the mob had cornered him, the sound of stones striking his ribs, his frail weight across my shoulders. He had seemed broken then, a man discarded by life. Yet now I saw the outline of something greater, a fallen heir cloaked in poverty, still carrying the torch of compassion. Rowan, I whispered, this deed, it could change everything, but it binds me to mercy. If I fail, then you will lose it, he said simply. but I do not believe you will fail. I sank into my chair, parchment pressed against my chest. For a long moment, silence ruled the workshop. The only sound was the faint crackle of the lantern and the quiet rhythm of Rowan's breathing. Memories surged. My mother teaching me to knead dough, my father's debts that nearly cost us our home, the nights when hunger gnawed so deep I could barely think. Every hardship, every kindness I had ever received weighed against this moment. Was I strong enough to carry it? Could compassion truly guide a market built on profit and power? I closed my eyes and felt the deed's weight settle into my soul. And then I whispered the words that would bind me forever. I accept. Rowan exhaled, his shoulders easing as though a burden had lifted. He stepped forward and laid a hand on mine. Then you are not just a baker's daughter, he said. You are the steward of Elderwood. The lantern flame flared, shadows bending across the walls as if the workshop itself acknowledged my vow. I tucked the deed into my cloak, the parchment pressing warm against my heart. At that exact moment, a trumpet blast echoed through the market square. I froze. Rowan's head snapped toward the door. Another trumpet followed, louder, closer, urgent. We rushed to the window. Through the shutters, I saw torchlight glinting on polished armor. A royal messenger had arrived at the fountain, a scroll in hand, the crest of the crown gleaming in red wax. Soldiers flanked him, their spears catching the first light of dawn. Rowan's expression hardened. The council wastes no time. They summon you to prove yourself. My throat dried. Tomorrow I would face them all. Friends, rivals, doubters, enemies. They would weigh me as one weighs grain, searching for weakness, hungry for cracks. I looked at Rowan, then at the parchment clutched to my chest. Compassion had brought me this far, but tomorrow it would be put to the test. The trumpet blast fades into silence, the market holding its breath. Through the window, armored guards march toward my door. Rowan whispers, "This is the first trial of many." My hands clench around the deed, my name glowing in gold. Tomorrow, mercy must stand before the council's judgment. At sunrise, I ascended the fountain's platform, heart in my throat. Hundreds of eyes turned to me. Hope, envy, suspicion. The beggar-turned-benefactor stood proudly at my side. The first rays of morning filtered into Elderwood Market, painting the square in shades of amber and rose. Mist clung to the cobblestones, carrying the faint scent of bread from distant ovens and smoke from dying torches. As I stepped onto the platform beside the ancient fountain, every sound seemed to still. The crowd pressed forward, eyes sharp and searching, waiting for me to prove whether last night's mercy had been foolishness or destiny. Rowan stood close, shoulders squared despite his tattered cloak. To the crowd, he was still the beggar they had nearly killed, but to me, he was the reason I now held the deed in my trembling hands. The parchment that bound me to the stewardship of Stall 12, the very heart of the market. I raised the parchment high. Its golden edges caught the light, glimmering like a crown no one expected me to wear. "Citizens of Elderwood," I began, voice wavering before settling into strength. "Yesterday, you saw cruelty. Today, you will see change. By the covenant sealed in this deed, I accept stewardship of Stall 12, and with it, the duty to guard this market with compassion." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Poor merchants at the edges leaned forward, faces lit with hope. But the wealthier vendors, those with polished stalls draped in silks, folded their arms, suspicion etched into their eyes. I unrolled the parchment and read aloud. "The steward of Stall 12 has authority to relieve debts, to convene council in times of crisis, and to distribute emergency grain in famine." My voice strengthened with each word, and though doubt clawed at my chest, I forced it down. Effective immediately, all stall fees for those below the poverty line are waived for 3 market days, and from this dawn forward, 200 bushels of grain shall be given freely to families in need. The crowd erupted. Cries of joy, disbelief, even laughter filled the air. A young mother clutched her child and sobbed. The fishmonger raised his cleaver like a toast, shouting blessings. Children cheered as if I had conjured magic. For a moment, the square pulsed with life, united by hope. But not all voices were kind. Near the front, a jeweler sneered. "Charity drains coffers. What happens when the grain runs dry? Shall we starve while beggars feast?" Murmurs spread, feeding doubt. My chest tightened, but I stood firm, clutching the parchment as if it were armor. Rosenthal, the wealthy oil merchant, stepped forward. His sable cloak brushed the stones, silver-threaded hem glittering like stormlight. He watched me with an unreadable expression, arms crossed. When our eyes met, he gave a slow nod, acknowledgement, not approval. His gaze said, "You have my attention, but not yet my support." Rowan placed a hand on my arm, steadying me. His presence reminded me why I stood there at all. Mercy had not abandoned him, and I would not abandon the market. I drew a deep breath, raising my voice once more. "I vow to listen to the poorest among you as much as to the richest," I declared. "This market was built on trade, yes, but without compassion, trade becomes tyranny. I will not allow hunger to rule our streets while wealth rots in storerooms. I will wield this authority with justice, with balance, and above all, with mercy." The square fell into hushed silence. I felt the weight of every gaze pressing against me. Then slowly, heads began to nod. A weaver near the front murmured, "Perhaps she is the one." Others echoed, "Maybe hope isn't foolish after all." The tide of opinion shifted, faint but undeniable. My knees nearly buckled with relief. Rowan squeezed my hand discreetly, his smile faint but proud. For a heartbeat, I allowed myself to believe the worst was behind us. But as the crowd's cheers rose again, Rosenthal stepped forward, his voice slicing through the noise. "You speak of mercy, Lady Steward. But stewardship is not proven by words. It must withstand challenge." From his cloak, he drew a rolled parchment, stamped with an ancient seal, the same crest that shimmered on Rowan's deed. The crowd hushed instantly. My breath froze as Rosenthal unrolled the parchment, his tone calm, but laced with menace. "This seal gives me equal claim to Stall 12. You may hold the deed, but I hold its twin." A gasp swept the square. The parchment in my hand suddenly felt heavier, fragile as glass. Around me, faces turned from awe to uncertainty, from belief to suspicion. Rosenthal's eyes narrowed, his voice quiet but cutting. "You've only begun to prove your worth. Let us see if mercy alone can sustain a market built on generations of toil." I stood frozen on the platform, parchment trembling in my hands, as the crowd erupted once more, not with cheers this time, but with questions, doubts, and accusations. Rosenthal raises his rival claim high, the seal glinting in sunlight. Gasps ripple through the crowd, doubt swirling like storm clouds. My name, once cheered, now wavers on their lips. Have I inherited stewardship, or stolen it? The dawn of my authority may yet become the dusk of my undoing. Power's weight settled on my shoulders like heavy chains. Each blessing I bestowed sparked fresh envy and challenge. The market's fate hinged on trials I had yet to master. The morning after Rosenthal's challenge dawned heavy with clouds, as if the heavens themselves mirrored my burden. Elderwood Market bustled as always, vendors unfurling bright cloth awnings, children chasing hens through alleys, the fountain's spray catching the light. But beneath the familiar rhythm lingered unease. My new title of steward carried both admiration and resentment, and the parchment granting me authority burned hot against my chest like a brand. Rosenthal wasted no time. He convened the merchant council in the hall by midday, where torches smoked against timbered walls and carved benches groaned under the weight of gathered traders. His sable cloak swept behind him as he rose, scroll in hand. "Lady Steward," he began, voice smooth as polished. "Marble. If mercy alone is your weapon, then let it be tested. 13 trials shall measure your worth, 1 for each moon. Fail in any, and your stewardship dissolves." A murmur rippled through the chamber, some in awe, others in agreement. My heart thundered, but my reply came steady. I accept. To refuse was to concede. To embrace the trials was to claim authority, no matter the cost. By mid-morning, the spice row swirled with aroma, saffron's honey warmth, pepper's bite, cinnamon's sweetness. 20 merchants crowded me, scales in hand, demanding a fair price. Master Armand, turban askew, thrust a crimson thread beneath my nose. "Set the rate, steward. Too low, and we starve. Too high, and the poor go hungry." I weighed the delicate thread between my fingers, recalling the faces of widows clutching empty bowls. 3 copper coins per thread, I declared. Gasps erupted. Some vendors scowled, others sighed in relief. Yet by sunset, trade boomed. Poor families carried saffron home for the first time, and merchants still lined pockets with steady profit. Trial 1 was endured, but whispers already questioned. Can generosity and profit truly coexist? The next dawn carried salt and gull cries as I stepped onto the river quay. Fishmonger Bram stood fists clenched, his apron smelling of brine and grief. Across from him, old Baker Marin waved a loaf, voice sharp with accusation. Their feud had boiled to breaking point. Spoiled bread versus overpriced fish. I pressed myself between them, the crowd's eyes piercing me like spears. "Enough," I said firmly. Proposing compromise, I decreed Bram take Marin's unsold bread to make fish cakes, while Marin buy Bram's smaller catches at cost. Reluctantly, they clasped hands, sealing peace. The crowd cheered. The quarrel ended. But doubt whispered again. Had I bought harmony too cheaply? By the third dusk, a line of hollow-eyed widows and children gathered at my stall. Their debts barred them from every other vendor. The deed allowed me to waive fees, but could I feed them? I opened my private reserves, oats, lentils, jars of honey. I boiled porridge, ladled steaming bowls, and tore bread with my own hands. Their gratitude was palpable, soft smiles, whispered blessings. But as my storeroom emptied, unease gnawed at me. My mercy fed them tonight, but what of tomorrow? Could a steward starve in order to nourish the market? The following days tested me in ways I had never imagined. A feud between cloth dyers and leather workers forced me to broker booth-sharing agreements, balancing colors and hides like scales of justice. Artisans clamored for recognition over mass producers, so I instituted fairs where townsfolk judged quality with their own eyes. A drought left wells dry. I rallied night watches to repair leaks, spending my coin to hire laborers. A masked patron offered me a fortune to sell stall 12. I refused publicly, declaring, "No price outweighs mercy." Each victory was fragile, each compromise delicate. Applause and criticism intertwined like threads in a tapestry. For every vendor who praised me, another muttered that I bled the coffers dry. Rosenthal's eyes followed me always, calculating, testing, waiting. By the 7th evening, the Merchant Council convened again in the timbered hall. The air reeked of candle wax and unspoken judgments. I reported each triumph, each settlement. Some councilors nodded approval, others whispered of ruin. Then Rosenthal rose, applause slow and deliberate. "Your efforts are commendable," he said, voice edged with steel. "But mercy unchecked tips the scales into chaos. Beware, steward, even kindness can destroy." He bowed, cloak sweeping the floor, and as he turned away, his lieutenant slipped me a folded note. My pulse quickened as I hid it beneath the table. Later, back at my stall, I unfolded the paper under lantern light. Its elegant script chilled me. Tonight, Betrayal's bloom. Trust none, beneath the warning lay a list of names. Among them was Whisperwind, my childhood confidant, my truest ally. The note trembles in my hand, ink gleaming like poison. Could those closest to me be plotting my fall? Trust and mercy, my only weapons, suddenly feel like traps. The trials are no longer of trade, but of loyalty itself. At dawn, I must decide, who is ally, and who is executioner? Beneath Elder Wood's cobblestones lay secrets older than any stall. Whispers of a hidden vault stirred in the night, promising salvation or ruin. One wrong step could bury us in darkness forever. The market above still buzzed with gossip of my proclamations, but under the fountain, silence ruled. Rowan traced his fingers across the ancient carvings at its base. Two hands joined beneath a rising sun. A hidden latch clicked beneath his touch. With a groan of stone on stone, the fountain shifted, revealing a dark stair curling into the earth. The air that rose was damp, heavy with the scent of forgotten centuries. I hesitated, lantern trembling in my grasp. "Are you certain?" I whispered. Rowan's storm-gray eyes glowed in the faint light. "If you are to be steward, you must know what lies beneath. The Heartstone is more than a symbol. It is the market's soul." We descended, boots slipping on mossy limestone steps. Water dripped from cracks, echoing like a heartbeat. Murals lined the tunnel walls, faded scenes of famine and plenty, of stewards offering bread, of councils rising and falling. The deeper we went, the louder the silence became, until even my breath felt like a trespass. The stairs opened into a cruciform chamber, vast and echoing, its ceiling lost in shadow. 4 pillars carved with vines and sunbursts rose like guardians. Between them stood a pedestal, its surface etched with runes glowing faintly emerald. Rowan approached reverently, placing his lantern on the pedestal. Light flared across the chamber, revealing crates marked with ancient seals, barrels bound in rusted iron, and a sarcophagus carved with harvest scenes. "This," Rowan whispered, voice trembling, "is the steward's vault. Here rests the Heartstone. Elderwood's covenant with mercy from his cloak." He drew a small varnished box, bronze filigree glinting in the lantern glow. My pulse thundered as he opened it. Inside lay a crystal orb, veined with molten gold that pulsed like a living heart. Its light bathed the chamber, warming my skin, searing my soul. I reached out, fingertips brushing its smooth surface. The orb thrummed, as though recognizing me. But before I could speak, echoes thundered down the tunnel behind us, boots pounding, voices barking commands. Rosenthal's guards. Torches flared in the darkness, shadows racing toward us. Rowan snapped the box shut, thrusting it into his cloak. "We must move," he hissed. We darted toward the northern corridor, the vault's damp breath chilling our faces. Runes glowed faintly on the walls as we passed, warning or blessing, I could not tell. Water pooled underfoot, each splash betraying our flight. Behind, steel clashed as the guards forced the hidden door wide. At last, the corridor opened into a second chamber, barred by an immense iron gate. Its lock was shaped like 2 hands clasped beneath a sunburst, the same symbol as the parchment seal. Rowan drew forth a golden key from around his neck, its bow engraved with rays. He fit it into the lock. Metal groaned, runes flared, and the gate swung wide. Inside lay the true vault, walls lined with crates of grain stamped with guild crests, shelves of scrolls bound in silk, and at the center, a dais bearing a stone sarcophagus. Dust drifted in the lamplight, thick as memory. Rowan stepped inside, relief softening his features. But before the gate could close, Rosenthal's command thundered from the tunnel. "Hold them! The Heartstone is ours." The chamber shook with the force of charging boots. Shadows leapt across the walls. I clutched Rowan's arm, lantern trembling, breath ragged. "We're trapped." Rowan's hand covered mine, steady and unyielding. "Not trapped," he whispered. "Tested." As the iron gate slammed shut behind us, sealing us in, I realized the truth. Mercy had brought me here, but only courage would see me out. The golden key still glowed in Rowan's hand, the lock sealing with a final click. Torches blazed beyond the gate, shadows pressing closer. The heartstone pulsed against my chest, like a second heartbeat. "Trust me," Rowan whispered, eyes blazing. In that moment, I knew the vault would either crown me steward or bury me beneath its stones. The vault's silence whispered promises and threats. Rosenthal's voice echoed like a curse. Only compassion endures. One step forward meant glory. One misstep meant the market's ruin. The chamber beyond the iron gate breathed like a living creature, its walls carved with runes that shimmered, faintly, casting greenish light across the damp floor. The heartstone pulsed in my hands, its golden veins glowing in rhythm with my racing heart. Rowan stood beside me, cloak heavy with dust, his eyes reflecting both awe and dread. Behind us, the sound of Rosenthal's guards clawed at the gate, but for now, the iron held. We stepped forward into the chamber of trials. Lantern light flared across the vast cavern, revealing relics strewn upon pedestals, a cracked crown of iron, a broken chalice encrusted with dried salt, a shattered press once used for minting coin. Each artifact whispered of stewards past who had failed. Their greed, their pride, their cowardice had become monuments of ruin. From a hidden pipe above, Rosenthal's voice thundered, cold and deliberate. "Rosemary Gale, chosen of Rowan's line, you claim the right of steward. Prove your worth, or be buried beneath the weight of your mercy." The ground shuddered. At once, panels slid back in the walls, revealing narrow slots. From them hissed a rain of darts tipped with black lacquer, each glinting with poison. Instinct screamed through me. I shoved Rowan behind a carved relief, a mural of a mother offering bread to a child. Darts clattered harmlessly against the stone, the mural glowing faintly as though shielding us. My breath came sharp and fast. "The chamber recognizes mercy," Rowan whispered. "Only through its path can we survive." We pressed forward, weaving through a gauntlet of shifting traps, blades thrusting from walls, pits yawning open, stones collapsing beneath our feet. Yet each danger yielded when I chose mercy over fear. Where I offered bread to an etched recess, the blades retracted. Where I pressed my palm against a mural of clasped hands, the stones solidified. Step by step, we advanced to the chamber's heart. At its center stood a massive altar of basalt, its surface darkly stained, its edges engraved with spirals of sunbursts. A shallow basin carved into its top glowed with faint golden light, the resting place of the heartstone. My hands trembled as I set the orb into the basin. The chamber shuddered, water bursting from hidden channels and flooding across the floor. Within seconds, icy currents swirled around our ankles, rising swiftly. The altar groaned, threatening to carry the heartstone away. "Sacrifice," Rowan gasped, clutching my arm. "It demands sacrifice." I pressed the orb deeper into the basin, ignoring the chill numbing my hands. The water rose to my waist, pulling at my skirts, but I held firm. "Take my strength, but spare the market," I whispered, voice breaking. For a breathless moment, I thought the torrent would drown us both. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the water receded into hidden drains, leaving the chamber glistening and still. Rosenthal's voice echoed again, tinged with reluctant respect. Trial 1. Sacrifice. Endured. But the reprieve was brief. The far wall split open, disgorging a cadre of basalt statues carved like warriors, their stone blades gleaming in the orb's light. They moved with unnatural swiftness, eyes glowing with baleful fire. Rowan seized a lantern, hurling light into their faces. Shadows leapt, confusing their sight. "Go!" he shouted. We darted between their massive strides, the clang of stone echoing in my ears. One blade missed my shoulder by a breath, Another shattered the floor inches from my feet. The portcullis ahead loomed tall, its bars engraved with glowing runes. Rowan jammed the golden key into its hidden slot. With a groan, the gate lifted, and we fled into a narrow passage just as the statues crashed down behind us. The corridor led us into a smaller antechamber. Its walls bore no weapons, no traps, only inscriptions etched in ancient script. Final trial. Forgiveness. The heartstone pulsed in my hands, its light softening, as if urging me toward surrender. Rosenthal's voice, low and mocking, filled the space. Mercy has brought you here. But can you forgive those who hunted you, those who despised you, those who would see you ruined? Without forgiveness, mercy curdles into vengeance. Choose, steward. Forgive or fall. I stared at Rowan, my heart heavy. Forgive Rosenthal? Forgive the mob who had hurled stones? Forgive the butcher whose cleaver nearly split me in two? Rage surged, sharp and hot, demanding justice. Yet the orb's warmth in my palms reminded me of the beggar I had once sheltered, the widows I had fed, the children who smiled because of mercy. Tears blurred my vision as I raised the heartstone high. I forgive, I whispered, not for Rosenthal, not for the butcher, but for the market itself, for Elder Wood's soul. The orb blazed with light, flooding the chamber in searing brilliance. The runes glowed white-hot, cracks sealing, traps vanishing. Even Rosenthal's voice faltered into silence. The chamber's ancient power sighed, and the final gate unlocked with a resonant click. I lowered the orb, chest heaving, every nerve alight. Rowan's hand closed over mine, steady and reverent. "You've done it," he murmured. "You are truly steward." The chamber door creaked open, spilling dawn's first light across the stone. But shadows stirred in the threshold, cloaked figures waiting beyond. The heartstone pulsed in my grasp, heavier than ever before. Rowan's whisper brushed my ear. "The trials are over, but the war has just begun." And I stepped forward, knowing Elderwood's fate still teetered on a blade. A crown of gold gleamed in temptation, while mercy whispered of sacrifice. The chamber reeked of steel, dust, and unspoken promises. Here I would decide whether Elderwood's soul lived or perished. The chamber had barely stilled from the last trial, when Rosenthal stepped from the shadows. His sable cloak trailed like smoke, his eyes glimmering in the glow of the heartstone I held against my chest. The runes on the walls reflected in his blade, casting slivers of crimson light across the cracked stone. He was no longer the distant challenger, no longer the unseen voice. Here he stood in flesh and bone, my rival, my judge, my final test. "You endured every trial," Rosenthal said, voice smooth as polished marble, yet edged with scorn. "Sacrifice, survival, forgiveness, you wielded them well. But mercy alone cannot build an empire." His sword slid free of its sheath, steel ringing sharp against silence. "Show me strength, or surrender your crown." My breath caught. I had fought mobs, storms, even the trials of stone. But this was different. His words were not just challenge, they were truth cloaked in poison. Without strength, mercy could indeed falter. Yet if I chose vengeance, if I met his steel with fury, the heartstone's glow would dim, its covenant broken. Rowan stood at my side, weary yet resolute. His hand brushed my shoulder. "Remember why you came here. Not for crowns, for them, the hungry, the broken, the forgotten." Rosenthal lunged. His blade swept arcs of silver across the chamber, sparks flying as it scraped stone. I stumbled back, clutching the orb tighter. "Fight me," he barked. "Prove that your mercy is not weakness." Steel hissed past my cheek, grazing a lock of hair. My pulse hammered, vision swimming with fear and fire. I grabbed a fallen staff from the ground, its wood scarred and brittle. Each time his sword struck, the staff shook, splinters biting my palms. The clash echoed like thunder, drowning even the steady hum of the Hearthstone. I saw in Rosenthal's eyes not hatred, but desperation. He needed me to fight, to abandon mercy, to prove him right, that only power rules. Every strike demanded I choose vengeance. But each time I parried, each time I held, I whispered inward, mercy is not surrender. Mercy is strength clothed in compassion. At last, with one final swing, Rosenthal's blade tore the staff from my hands. It clattered across the stones, useless. He raised his sword for the finishing blow. My knees buckled. The Hearthstone pulsed against me like a second heartbeat, its warmth seeping into my bones. I will not strike you, I said, lifting the orb high. My voice trembled, but clarity burned in it. I will not meet hate with hate. I forgive you, Rosenthal. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then the Hearthstone blazed with light so fierce it banished every shadow. Rosenthal froze, sword hovering inches from my throat. His lips parted, eyes widening as the glow washed over him. The blade slipped from his hand, clanging against the stone floor. His chest heaved as though the weight of generations lifted from him. You, he whispered, voice breaking. You chose mercy. Even for me, I lowered the orb, tears stinging my eyes. Because mercy is not weakness. It is the only strength worth wielding. Rosenthal dropped to his knees, cloak pooling around him. The chamber's runes, once etched in, blood red, now shone in soft gold. Dust fell like blessing from the vaulted ceiling, as if the vault itself sighed in relief. Rowan stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm, steadying me. His eyes glistened. You've won, not with steel, but with compassion. Elderwood is free, I exhaled, body trembling with exhaustion. The orb's light steadied into a calm glow, no longer furious, but content, as though acknowledging the covenant fulfilled. The chamber door groaned open behind us, spilling dawn's first light across the floor. Yet beyond the door, shadows stirred, an army of cloaked figures waiting in silence. Their banners bore the crest of a crown unknown, their eyes fixed on the Hearthstone. Rosenthal lifted his head, dread etched on his face. They are not mine, he whispered. And in that moment, I knew. The trials had ended, but the war had only begun. Sunrise bathed the square in molten gold, every ray shimmering with rebirth. The crowd waited in hushed wonder, eyes searching for proof that mercy had prevailed. And with the Hearthstone in my hands, I stepped into history. The first rays of dawn stretched across Elderwood Market, painting the cracked cobblestones in fire and rose. Mist rose from the ancient fountain, its spray glowing as though the heavens themselves had bent low to bless this hour. My skirts clung heavy from the night's storm, but in my arms, the Hearthstone gleamed, veins of molten light coursing like a living river. The market, once divided by wealth and want, now stood gathered as one. Fishermen with nets slung across their backs pressed shoulder to shoulder with silken merchants. Children clutched scraps of bread in their hands, their hollow eyes now glimmering with hope. Even the guards, their armor still slick with dew, lowered their spears in reverence. I mounted the fountain steps, my knees weak from exhaustion, yet firmed by resolve. The orb pulsed in rhythm with my heart, and when I raised it high, gasps rippled through the crowd. The light spilled outward like dawn itself, washing faces, cleansing doubt, weaving every soul into a single tapestry of belief. Citizens of Elderwood, my voice rang clear, steadier than I felt. Yesterday fear ruled these stones, but today mercy has conquered. No family shall starve beneath these stalls, no debt shall bind the poor in chains of despair. By this Hearthstone, and by covenant of compassion, we begin anew. For a moment, silence. Then, like a dam broken, cheers thundered across the square. Vendors dropped wares to clap their hands. Mothers lifted children high above the crowd. Elders wept openly, tears cutting clean lines down weathered cheeks. From the front, Rosenthal stepped forward, no longer my adversary, but a man transformed. His sword lay sheathed, his cloak heavy with humility. Before the fountain, he bent one knee, pressing the ruby pommel of his blade to the stone. His voice, once sharp with scorn, now trembled with reverence. To mercy's steward, I yield. Rowan appeared at my side, not the beggar of yesterday, but a partner in destiny. His eyes shone as he clasped my hand, raising it for all to see. This market lives because she chose compassion when cruelty demanded blood. His words echoed, stirring the crowd into cries of affirmation. Mercy, mercy, mercy. My chest tightened. For the first time, I felt not just a bearer of the Heartstone, but its servant. Every face below, hopeful, tear-streaked, radiant, was my charge. This power was never crown nor weapon. It was covenant. I descended the fountain steps, letting the people touch the orb, each brief contact sparking renewed joy. A child pressed her lips to its surface, giggling as the light shimmered brighter. An old widow bowed her head, whispering prayers of thanks. A blacksmith raised his soot-stained hands, vowing to forge tools for the needy, without charge. Every clasp of their hands reminded me, this was no triumph of mine alone. It was theirs. It was ours. And then, a horn blast cut through the jubilation, clear, sharp, regal. The crowd stilled, turning toward the market gates. There, a royal carriage rolled forward, white horses prancing with silver bridles that flashed like lightning in the morning sun. Scarlet banners unfurled in the breeze, bearing the Queen's crest, a rose encircled by laurel. A hush fell so complete, even the fountain's splash seemed to bow in silence. The carriage door opened, and the Queen's envoy emerged. Tall, stern, draped in embroidered velvet that caught dawn's every ray. In his gloved hand, he held a scroll sealed with wax the color of blood. He lifted it high. By decree of Her Majesty, Queen Marisol, his voice boomed. The steward of Elderwood Market is summoned to the royal court. The Heartstone's covenant is no longer the charge of one town. It must be carried across the realm. Gasps swept the crowd. Awe mingled with fear. My pulse stuttered. Elderwood had been trial enough. Could I carry this weight to the kingdom itself? Rowan's hand squeezed mine, steady as stone. Rosenthal's gaze flicked with new respect, perhaps even loyalty. The envoy unfurled the scroll, its ink gleaming gold. You are called to the crown, to bring mercy's law to every market, every city, every soul. The Heartstone warmed in my arms, glowing brighter as if eager for the journey ahead. Around me, voices rose in trembling cheer. Go. Take our light with you. Carry our hope. I bowed my head, tears burning my lashes. This was no longer about Elderwood. This was about an empire yet unborn, an empire of compassion. The Queen's envoy lowers his scroll, eyes locking with mine. Beyond Elderwood's gates, distant banners rise, kingdoms watching, waiting. Rowan whispers, "The world beyond needs you." The Heartstone flares in my arms, pulsing like a star. And as dawn breaks, I realize this was only the beginning. They called me steward, but in truth I felt more like a servant. Every decree I made carried the weight of another's hunger, another's hope. Could compassion truly sustain an empire, or would mercy itself become my undoing? The transformation of Elderwood Market began quietly, like dawn creeping over stone rooftops, yet it reshaped everything. The cobblestones that had once echoed with haggling and suspicion now rang with laughter, music, and gratitude. The fountain at the square's heart no longer marked only trade. It had become a symbol of unity. Where once I sold bread alone, now caravans rolled in carrying grain, herbs, and cloth. Their drivers not nobles or soldiers, but apprentices and farmers bound by the same covenant of mercy. The new council hall, built beside the fountain, embodied this rebirth. Its walls were constructed not from imported marble, but from local stone, polished until it gleamed in dawn's light. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows that depicted the Hearthstone glowing in golden rays, its light touching farmers, merchants, children, and widows alike. Inside, oak benches curved around a circular dais, each seat carved with the symbol of interlocked hands. For the first time in Elderwood's long history, bakers and blacksmiths sat beside spice lords and cloth merchants as equals, their voices recorded in open scrolls so that no decision could ever vanish into secrecy. I stood at the dais, the Hearthstone cradled in its lantern, and watched the miracle unfold. A fisherman rose, hands rough and calloused, proposing nets for villages still haunted by famine. A widow argued for schools so orphans could learn trades and escape the cycle of despair. A noble, his silken sleeves trembling, pledged his family's vault to fund public kitchens. For each voice, I listened, and when discord threatened to unravel harmony, I raised the Hearthstone. Its glow washed over every face, silencing quarrels, and the chamber would remember mercy's voice above all else. "Let compassion guide our hands," I said, and they obeyed. The decrees of that first season reshaped the market in ways no sword or crown could. By the riverfront, great iron cauldrons steamed with porridge for widows and orphans, the smell of oats and honey wafting through the mist at dawn. Beside the fountain, the hearthside workshop welcomed apprentices, carpenters showing trembling boys how to plane wood, weavers guiding girls to thread bright cloth, smiths teaching orphans to strike iron into tools. Laughter mingled with the hiss of steam and the clatter of hammers, a symphony of industry, born not of greed, but of shared hope. Everywhere I walked, I witnessed the fruits of mercy. The flower seller who once wept into wilted petals now trained children to weave garlands that adorned festival arches. The spice merchant, once bitter at lowered prices, now smiled as his stall overflowed with customers who could finally afford saffron threads. Even Rosenthal, who had once tested me with suspicion, now stood at my side, his voice lending weight to policies that shielded the poor instead of exploiting them. When summer ripened, we held the Festival of Unity. The market square bloomed with colors, emerald and scarlet banners snapping in warm breezes, lanterns glowing above every awning, tables sagging beneath roasted meats, sweet pastries, and steaming mugs of mint tea. At dusk, I carried the Hearthstone through the throng, its veins of gold glowing like a living heartbeat. Children chased its light across cobblestones, while elders reached trembling hands toward it in awe. For one night, Elderwood Market was not divided by class or coin. It was one family. Music swelled, dancers spun, and laughter rang like bells under a sky blazing with stars. In that moment I realized we were not merely reviving a market. We were building an empire, not of conquest and iron, but of care and compassion. An empire stronger than any wall of stone, for it lived in the hearts of its people. When the music faded into night's hush, Rowan waited by the fountain's lip. No longer wrapped in rags, he wore simple linen stitched with the Hearthstone's crest. His eyes, once hollow with hunger, now glimmered with calm dignity. "You have given me more than life," he said softly, breaking a loaf of fresh bread in his hands. "You've shown me that mercy itself can be a legacy." I clasped his hand, feeling the warmth of bread and friendship alike. "We built this together," I told him. In his gaze, I no longer saw the beggar who once cowered beneath the crowd's stones, but a steward beside me, equal bearer of this covenant. Yet even as Elderwood thrived, whispers carried on the wind. Foreign coins appeared in stalls, minted with winged crests and moonlit crowns. One evening, in the quiet of the hearthside workshop, I discovered them hidden beneath a bundle of grain receipts. Tucked among them was a folded letter, its wax seal pressed with a crest I had never seen before, fragile wings crowned by a rising moon. The message inside was brief: "The world beyond needs your light." I held the parchment by lantern flame, my heart quickening. Rowan stepped beside me, his voice hushed with awe and fear. "It is an invitation," he whispered, "or perhaps a warning." The Heartstone pulsed in its lantern, glowing brighter than before, as though answering a call that came from beyond our borders. Elderwood's rebirth had been only the beginning. The letter trembled in my hand, its seal cracked by destiny itself. Foreign coins glimmered in the workshop's shadows, promises of lands unknown. Rowan's whisper hung heavy in the air. "They've come for the Heartstone." The orb's glow flared like a rising sun, impatient, insistent. And I understood. Our empire of compassion had only just begun its journey. Beyond the bustling market lay roads no map had charted. The Heartstone glowed like a star in my hands, a compass pointing toward mercy's next frontier. Would compassion thrive beyond Elderwood, or shatter against the unknown? The dawn of our departure arrived with mist curling low over Elderwood's fields, soft tendrils weaving through carts laden with grain, cloth, and salted fish. The caravan stretched across the horizon, a ribbon of promise shimmering in the first golden light. Oxen plodded with patient strength, their harness bells ringing like a hymn of hope. The Heartstone, suspended in its lantern at the caravan's front, pulsed gently, its veins of gold a living heartbeat that lit our path forward. I stood at the lead cart, cloak drawn tight against the chill, Rowan steady at my side. His hands, once frail and dirt-smeared, now held the reins of the journey with quiet strength. Behind us trailed merchants, apprentices, widows, and orphans, souls who had once clung to survival, but now marched in unity. The air buzzed not with fear, but with anticipation. What lay beyond Elderwood's borders? Could compassion take root in lands untouched by the Heartstone's covenant? Our first stop was Meadows Reach, a hamlet nestled among green hills and wide barley fields. Its cottages, thatched and weathered, bore the scars of lean years, doors barred against bandits, windows shuttered in suspicion. Yet as our caravan crested the ridge, children poured from doorways, their bare feet pattering across the dirt road. Their laughter rang out, carrying the sound of a people starved not only of food, but of hope. I lifted the Heartstone high, its glow spilling across their awestruck faces. Gasps rippled through the crowd as I declared, "No stomach here shall remain empty." Grain was poured into communal bins by the well, and cauldrons bubbled with porridge sweetened by Elderwood's honey. Children ate first, cheeks round with delight. Elders wept quietly into their bowls. The market's covenant was no longer a rumor. It was reality. That night, villagers signed their names, shaky but proud, onto the market charter. I watched as calloused hands gripped the quill, binding Meadows Reach not to power, but to compassion. Days later, the caravan wound into the Briarwood Vale, where artisans once carved wood and stone in lonely glens. The hamlet's matron, Lessa, greeted us with a carved staff inlaid with silver runes, the symbol of sanctuary. We raised a pavilion beside the birch groves, turning the clearing into a temporary workshop. Carpenters taught apprentices to shape lathes and chisels. Weavers showed children how to thread bright cloth. Stonemasons guided trembling hands to carve figures of grace from rough rock. By dusk, torches glowed beneath the trees, and the first Briarwood Fair was born. Here I saw compassion take a new form, not only feeding the hungry, but giving purpose to the idle, dignity to the forgotten. Work became worship, and each craft learned became a seed of prosperity. But not every road greeted us with open arms. In Windward, a dive fishing village battered by storms and pirates, nets lay in tatters and docks in ruin. Suspicion shadowed their eyes as we arrived, and whispers of outsiders rippled through the salt air. Rowan stepped forward, offering his hands to mend broken nets. I joined him, sleeves rolled, knotting hemp until my fingers bled. Slowly, their suspicion melted into trust. When the day's catch filled baskets once more, the villagers bowed their heads in gratitude, pledging their loyalty to the Covenant. At Raven's Rest, rumors of brigands prowled the crossroads. Our caravan risked ambush at every turn. Yet instead of swords, we raised walls of wagons, repairing wheels and reinforcing carts together. When the brigands finally came, they found not a frightened caravan, but a fortress of unity. They fled, leaving us untouched. Weeks later, our path curved upward into the Great Divide, mountains so high their peaks pierced the clouds. The climb was brutal. Icy winds clawed at our faces, and narrow passes threatened to swallow carts whole. But the Heartstone's light never faltered. At last, we crested the ridge and gazed down upon High Vale, a village of shepherds and miners, its slate roofs nestled in emerald valleys. Their faces, wary at first, softened when we descended with the Heartstone glowing like a second sun. We offered grain, tools, and the charter. They offered cheese, stone, and loyalty. As the Heartstone's glow spread across Highvale, I realized we had planted seeds of compassion in soil once hardened by fear. On the journey home, our carts overflowed not only with goods, honey, wool, carved trinkets, but with pledges. Each village had signed the market charter, binding themselves to fair trade, safe passage, and shared prosperity. The Heartstone's covenant now stretched across valleys and ridges, from riverfront keys to mountain peaks. But one night, as I stored goods in the Hearthside workshop, I found foreign coins hidden beneath the ledgers, minted with strange crests I had never seen. Beneath them lay a letter, its seal bearing delicate wings crowned in moonlight. To the bearer of the Heartstone, your light has reached our shores. We beseech your mercy in lands beyond the sea. Rowan read the letter beside me, his eyes wide with both fear and wonder. The world is calling, he whispered. I looked at the Heartstone, its glow brightening, restless. Elderwood had been only the beginning. Compassion demanded horizons, yet uncharted. The Heartstone pulsed like a beacon, its glow spilling beyond our borders. Foreign coins gleamed in my palm, promises of kingdoms unknown. A letter whispered of distant shores. The world needs your light. Rowan's voice trembled beside me. They've come for the Heartstone. Ahead lay uncharted seas, and the greatest trial of all. If you felt the thrill of every twist and the power of compassion, smash that like button. It fuels more stories like this. Hit subscribe and tap the bell, said Tao's ER. You're first to journey with us into new adventures of mercy and courage. Tell me in the comments, which moment made your heart race, and where would you take the Heartstone next? Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that kindness can conquer any challenge, and let's grow this community of hope together.